Welcome to the in, welcome to the Intellectual Soul Food Podcast, where we talk about various topics including race, diversity, gender, and how that all that ties into media. I am Stuart Scott, your host for today, and today we have uh, hello. My name is Stuart Scott, and today I will be your host for the Intellectual Soul Food Podcast, where we talk about race, diversity, gender, and how that all ties into representation. Today, we are talking about women in sports journalism, and we have various guests who are very qualified and know what they talk about on this topic. From top down, I will introduce our guest for today, Christian Bauman. Kristen Bauman, how are you today?
I'm good. How about you?
Christian Stargill, I can't see you, but how are you today?
I'm well. Thank you.
Okay, that is great. Next, Tamira, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. Chad,
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing amazing, spectacular, wonderful, and excellent. Lastly, Shania,
I'm doing good. How are you?
I apologize for mispronouncing your name, but let's get into these topics today. So,
First, I'm gonna start talking about like Women's History Month and how it came about since March is Women's History Month. So first, Women's History Month was Women's Day in 1908. It started in Manhattan. It was just a bunch of socialists and suffragists commemorating Women's Day. Around this time, women couldn't vote, so you have to keep that in mind. And then later, decades later, about 8 decades later in 1980, Congress passed Public Law 9728, which requested president to proclaim Women's History Week. So for about the next 5 years, Women's History Week was declared by presidents, but it wasn't until Public Law 109 where Women's History Month was declared. Of course, like it takes time for social change, so it took another few decades for Congress to continuously declare Women's History Month, and ever since 1955, we've been declaring March as Women's History Month. So, with Women's History Month being March, we decided to talk about sports journalism and women in sports journalism. So, to get into that topic, I'll be giving you a brief history of women in sports journalism and pivotal women within the sports journalism industry. So first, what really started this was Title IX in 1972. No person was discriminated on the basis of sex for any activity or program. So from there, we see a more appeal of women wanting to do things because now it is legal for women to take part in any and all activities. So one of our first key moments in women's sports journalism is a woman by the name of Leslie Besser. She joined the staff with the Boston Globe after graduating from Boston College. From there, she covered everything, but in 2 years, she became a beat journalist for the NFL. For those of you who don't know, beat journalists just focus on like one topic for all of their stories. And she was assigned to the New England Patriots. From there, she became the first woman to cover MLB, which is the baseball league. Um, so basically, yeah, she did not have access to the locker rooms like her male counterparts, and locker room interviews are very big within journalism. So that was a big gap for her because she didn't have that access they had to get that information right after the games. So she took it upon herself into the MLB. At the time, it was Commissioner Bowie King. It took months. It took actually years, but they voted in her favor. So this was the first like big W for sports journalism with women, but it still took a few years for women to actually see change. Just because, like I said before, it takes a while for social change to come about. So they did have to face like tension and like pushback from people with the teams. And then from there, we just see a more influx of women's sports journalism. We have Jane Kennedy, we have Gail Gardner, Robin Roberts, Hannah Storm, Doris Burke, and Phyllis George, just to name a few.
With Thank you so much for that information. With all that being said, I want to ask one very important question. Um, should women athletes have an opinion on issues of social justice?
Well, of course, I think female athletes should have like, an opinion when it comes to that because they already like face so much like adversity and like other stuff when it comes to them alone in sports. So I feel like it's important to, hear what they have to say or hear, what changes should be made because they're the ones that witness it like firsthand.
Well, that's great. Anyone else?
I definitely that women feel this because we're all humans and everything, and just because you're a woman, doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a voice or you shouldn't have an opinion. You still go through everything, if not more, that men athletes do. So I feel like your opinion and what you have to say is just as important as anybody else's.
Well, thank you for voicing your opinion. The reason I bring this up is because Jamel Hill, um, who was a reporter at ESPN, was fired because of her opinions on Donald Trump. And I want to talk about that with you all today.
I personally thought this was a really interesting situation because sometimes it's hard to cross the lines with like bringing politics into sports, but I do think it's very important that we talk about these things because it does play a part in sports. And I think her story really shows how it made a lot of people uncomfortable talking about serious issues within sports, let alone a woman being the face of that, a black woman.
Yes. And also to piggyback off what you said, um, I just wanted to ask you guys, do you think that the medical story would steer other black women from wanting to be reporters on big networks like ESPN because they may be scared they may get fired or let go or something like that?
I actually like that question because I'm like indifferent. I think they would, feel a little more intimidated, but at the same time, I feel like it's important that we like start to fill those kind of positions because it's important to get those point of views, if that makes sense.
I also agree. I think for me personally, I would be a bit intimidated to be talking about that type of stuff on those networks just because of how it ended for her. But at the same time, she also has been booked and busy ever since then. Like she has her own podcast now, and she has her own with Spotify, and she also has one talking about HBO The Wire with Dan Lathan. So I don't really think it would be too bad for us to keep talking about these things on big networks, but we also got to be prepared to face the backlash if we are going to do that.
Well, that's very interesting. Um, the next thing I want to talk about are when we talk about the challenges that when it comes to the effects of bias, media bias, and how it affects interest in women in sports. Um, what do you think about that? An example of this is how Serena Williams was treated by the media when they call her manly or they say a lot of demeaning things about her and her performance. I want to know your thoughts
Well,
on this.
well, to me, I just feel like whenever you know they try to portray women in a certain way, I think that's just a way of trying to downplay, women and their talent. You hear it in every sport, like soccer, tennis, basketball. You know, um, there could be, a female basketball player that's just a superstar. You can see she has talent, but then they'll try to bring up something that basically takes away from everything that she does, or they'll try to look for a certain flaw that they don't necessarily do to male athletes as much. So I think that's one of the reasons why they do that.
To me, I do believe that when it comes to sports and women, I think that, frankly, I think that the bias when it comes to like Serena Williams specifically, I think like when you see a tall uh, black woman, a dark skinned black woman that obviously trains hard to perfect her craft, and Serena Williams like is amazing as you all know at tennis. Like more Grand Slam wins than I can count out on my fingers. Amazing accomplishments. Like even after she uh, got pregnant and came back into the game, and like just recently she faced Naomi Osaka and lost. Even though she lost, it was a great match. It was a great game. The fact that the media continues to uh, portray Serena Williams in this light as somebody who uh, doesn't have femininity, doesn't portray the traditional look of femininity. Frankly, that's gross. For lack of a better word, that's very gross. She's an amazing example of a sportswoman, um, in not only in sports but in her personal life. Like she's a great role model for her daughter, for my sister who also plays tennis, for other um, women. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this?
Yeah.
I You can go ahead.
For women is bias to overcome stereotypes. Um, that male way more coverage ways just because they are male sports. Um, so women's sports, you'll see minor league based kids that are 12 and under are on TV. You'll never see any of the sports popular that girls or like be broadcasted on TV or anything like that. Um, I think that women are starting to also not get very interested in sports just because of the lack of coverage there is on it. You don't see a lot of people that are interested in it, and also want to go into the disparities of women's sports. I know recently that I don't know if you guys seen, but it was on Twitter and Instagram, a lot of stuff. It's March Madness for both women and men. And the locker room and food differences and the things that they got for just making it to March Madness, there was a big difference in what the women got and what the men got. So I want to ask you guys, how do you guys feel about that, or your opinions about that?
I was actually like very pleased to see the amount of like attention it got. I remember seeing the first original tweet of the girl on Twitter showing the locker room. And it got, when I saw it, it was at like 200,000 likes. So I was like really excited that it was getting that much attention, especially with us talking about it. It seemed like kind of the perfect moment. But also I was reading some of the comments, and I follow quite a different blogs on my Instagram, and one was my mixtapes, and this is one just about music. So it's more just so guys on this page, and the comments were just so like, disrespectful, just basically saying like people don't watch women's sports. They're not bringing revenue in, so of course their locker room is going to look like that, and just all these things that I don't personally agree with. But it was just crazy to see how people still have this big bias against women's sports.
Yeah, I was gonna speak on that too. I dropped a picture in the chat. I don't know how to share it, but of like the girls' locker room before and after, and it's just crazy how they had to cause that kind of uproar on social media for the NCAA and other people to realize that like the mistreatment is just so blatant and nobody wants to like fix it or address the issue, because like women in sports always are like represented poorly and they receive like less recognition when it comes to you know the media.
Yeah, and like I think a reason for that, one of the big reasons for that is because a lot of the male players don't stick up for the women. I feel like if the male players who most people look at, if they would actually step out and say you're not treating them fairly, they deserve the same benefits that men get when they get to the tournament. They had to work. The women had to work just as hard as the men to get to March Madness. There shouldn't be any difference in the type of stuff that they get, things like that. If the male players would do that, and not even just basketball, just male players in all sports, I feel like it'd be way different, and it would be more equal as what the women get. But you really don't hear a lot of male athletes speaking up for the women athletes, and it's sad, but it's the truth.
Well,
I,
that's
I was just gonna say, I do wonder what would have happened, like, had she not posted that. Like, it's just so crazy. It kind of mirrors like the Black Lives Matter movement to me, because it's like we've been having all these issues and no one cared until it got all this attention. So yeah.
well, that's great to hear. Thank you for your input. Um, I want to pivot back to sports journalism for a little bit. Have there been any? Could you guys give any stats for men sport journalists compared to women, or any studies regarding to the quality of press that women's coverage has, like women's sports has, when it comes to uh, male bias?
I had actually found this like report type of thing about like racial and gender hiring practices. Is from the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport, and this is 2020. So the NBA received an A plus for racial hiring practices and a B for gender hiring practices, which overall gave them a score of a B plus. MLB received a B plus on racial hiring and C for gender hiring practices, um, which in total gave them the grade of a B minus. Soccer received a racial hiring practice grade of an A and a gender of a C minus, which in total gave them a grade of a B. And the National Football League received a grade of a B plus for racial hiring and C for gender hiring, which gave them the average score of a C.
Sounds pretty good. There's actually some hopefulness in that.
It's still like a big disparity, but over the years, of course, it has gotten better. It's still not nearly enough women's journalists, but this report is a over time report. Like, how have we progressed over time? But the gap is still there and it's still very prominent, especially when you get into the nitty gritty of the gender gap and then the racial gap after that. So, like Black women in sports journalism, or Asian women, or Hispanic women, and so on.
Well, that's great to hear. Um, let's see. So, our next topic. If I can just find it. Hold on one moment. Why do you think there's a lack of female representation when it comes to sports journalism?
I feel like it's just that like constructed bias that people don't care about women's sports, and when that's like a ideology, you kind of just it's subconscious a bit. Like I don't know. I never until we started doing this, I never had like a personal gravitation to women's sports. And I started thinking like, was it subconscious because you always hear like, oh, no one cares about it, no one cares. Even in high school, you just hear like, no one goes to the women's basketball games, but everyone goes to the men's basketball games. So it's just like, I wonder how that had an effect on me and my interest within journalism.
Yeah, I had a article kind of about this. Women do make up 40%. I don't know if I can share this or not. Hold on. So, can y'all see this?
Mm-mm.
No?
Yeah, I can see it.
Oh, you can
Is
see
it a
it?
stat?
Yeah.
It's just an article basically saying how women make up 40% of all participants in sports, but they only receive 4% of sports media coverage. And this not kind of, this affects like all kinds of things like sponsorships, money, because women don't get paid as much as male athletes either. So yeah, the article just talks about just gives like some statistics and talks about how different ways that we can like shed light on like female athletes and stuff.
I also think to stereotyping and making diversity in newsrooms a priority that it's not really right now. I've seen on an article that Black women they only represent about 2.5% of overall journalism workforce. This is back in 2016. It was according to NE. So I feel like for one, a lot of higher up companies and everything, they don't see women as leaders. So they think that women lack leadership skills and they won't be very fit or for the type of job that that journalism requires. So I think that has definitely affected that career in a way.
Um, I completely agree with that. And just on top of that, I think another reason why there's a lack of female representation is because whenever you see male sports reporting or male sports, they're always on big TV networks. You see them play sports on ABC, CBS, stuff like that, and you never see women play on any of those TV stations. So I feel like it's not so much people aren't watching women, but if they actually put women's sports on channels that people actually watch, then I feel like the numbers would go up way higher, and women would have more of an opportunity to have themselves on on a bigger platform.
Yes, I also think that it's weird that, well, um, kind of different that men have to cover men's sports. I feel like women know just as much about it. Like certain people, especially if they're interested, like you can know anything. I don't think that just because you're a man that you have to necessarily cover man's sport, and just because you're a woman, you have to cover women's sports. It shouldn't matter.
Yeah, I completely agree with that because there's definitely a lot like there's definitely women reporters that are better than some men reporters in some sports. So that's definitely true.
I found that ESPN was actually when I was just looking up articles about this, I found that ESPN was kind of applauded for their diversity within their channel. But when I was actually looking, 40 out of the 44 sports columnists they had, only 4 of those women were Black. So I think we just have such a longer way to go when it comes to like true diversity and true coverage within sports journalism. Yeah, that was the report that the Associated Press gender report card. That was the year that after that ESPN got a lot of coverage for diversity and whatnot, but people were kind of speculating about it almost at the same time. It's kind of crazy. Like it also had a bit of controversy as well that I found.
Well, that's all great to hear. That's this from what I've heard today when it comes to the statistics and reports that you guys were talking about today. It seems as if uh, there's a very hopeful future when it comes to women in sports journalism. That we're on the right track, seeing women in sports. I want to ask you guys a question. What what is your experience when it comes to women in sports or women in sports journalism, particularly in in your time, whether that be in college or whether that be younger? What when have you like seen women on TV or like in the news when it comes to like sports journalism, and how has that seeing that impacted you?
Honestly, for me, my first instance outside of school was the Jamel Hill case. I remember seeing it on social media, like seeing her face all on my social media at the time, but I didn't really look into it. It wasn't until last year um, I had Professor Chambers, and his daughter is actually a sports columnist, I believe, with Bleacher Report or Highlight House. It's actually Highlight House, and she has her own like section called Highlight Her. So that was really like my first introduction to it, and I thought it was very cool that she was doing that type of stuff, especially as a Black woman. So yeah, my first like experience with women's sports journalists personally was hearing that. So until I did this research, my opinion was like pretty positive on it until I really started looking into the nitty gritty of it.
Well, I can say like from like actual experience and like being in like women's sports as like in high school and stuff like that. Like somebody said before, a lot of the times like at the games and stuff, our crowd isn't as big as like the male crowds are. You know, everybody's favorite games to go to are like the basketball games and the football games, but like the volleyball games and stuff like that are like really, really dead. So I can't say I've experienced that firsthand. And yeah, really like all like when it come to school, all of like the money and the funds going to like the male sports, but like the female sports don't really get that much stuff.
Yeah, kind of, like what Kristen said, back in high school, you know, uh, especially for, guys, whenever we got done playing, we would always support, the girls, even in games where they didn't have, very big crowds, we would always support them because, we knew it was important for them to have that support because, how hard they work and stuff like that. But as far as my first experience with women's journalism, it definitely was Jamel Hill. That was definitely someone that I respect because before that I never saw, a strong Black woman, on a sports network, saying the things that she said, um,
Right.
really showing that she's pro-Black, she stands for us. So so whenever I can remember whenever she left ESPN, I was like what's going on? What happened to Jamel Hill? Like she was that important to us, and she still is.
I think the cool thing about Jamel Hill is she didn't double down on her statements after she got all the backfire. I think that really stood out to me. And that was really important to me that she stood her ground on what she said because that's how a lot of us feel. So I thought that was really important for her and for the Black community in general.
If anybody else wants to say anything before I go, not leave, but like just say my piece, they can. Okay, well, when it comes to my time and like me learning about like women in sports and like just women in sports journalism, Jamel Hill is definitely one of the like first people I think of when I think of women in sports journalism. Like it was a sad day to learn that she left ESPN, but she's gone on to like greater pastures, greater and greener pastures with her podcast. I think I know it's unbothered.
Yeah, I think I have it in my notes.
Cause I'm a
Yeah,
frequent
she's
listener
really
of her
nice.
podcast. Yeah, Jamel Hill's Unbothered. Like her
Mhm.
podcast is amazing. Go listen to it if you haven't. She does interviews with athletes, with various personalities in all different types of industries. It's very enlightening and very entertaining. Um, I think my first instance of like women in sports for me was two things. Powder puff football. If I don't know if you guys have like had powder puff football in high school, but like in the spring, right? Girls got a chance to play like touch football, and do like a powder puff event, and it was very interesting, just to see like women actually play football. Another instance with women in sports is Serena and Venus Williams and my younger sister. Like my younger sister got into tennis because of Serena and Venus Williams, and seeing them dominate the tennis court like that, amazing.
I have two things, like comments to go off what you said. First, about the powder puff game, you made me think. At my high school, we actually had a women's kicker on our football team. So my experience with like women's sports wasn't like I said. I had saw the disparities between the crowds, but I feel like my high school was pretty like progressive and involved, I guess, because we also had the powder puff game, which was really cool. And another thing is, I also about the tennis comment, I also took like tennis classes. And I do think I was a bit inspired by Serena Williams. So it's just, even though I was like the only black girl there, it's still like seeing stuff like that is important for like just being a woman and a black woman. So yeah.
Yeah, gonna piggyback off of what you said. Jamel Hill, she's definitely a very empowering woman, and I think that she's also very apologetically black. And I feel like ESPN and everyone else seen that as a threat. I also agree that when you said that what she said, she didn't go back on it. She really stands on her word. I think that's very important. And I play softball at Central, and just as like a woman in the sports or whatever, it's definitely different from the men's. Just overall, like we don't have a locker room. Um, we don't have a field either. But I mean, baseball doesn't either. But still, we don't have a field, and it's just a lot of things that are just like way different and something about that I wouldn't experience as a woman athlete. I thought that it would just be better, but yeah.
If anybody else has anything to say before I go, again, you can if you want to. Okay. Uh, there's something else I wanted to talk about before we leave. Uh, being that we are a podcast that talks about media and representation, and uh, in this particular episode, how we're talking about sports. Um, I want to talk about how women are portrayed in sports movies, particularly ones that I think of when I think of women in sports. I think of um, Joanna Man, where this dude like he gets kicked out of the NBA and impersonates a woman to join the NBA. Well, not the NBA, the WNBA, and like be in the WNBA. and The Long Shots, which is based on a true story. It's starring Ice Cube and Keke Palmer. It's about the story of the real life events of Jasmine Plummer, the first female to participate in the Pop Warner football tournament. I don't know if you guys have heard of these movies, but I just want to talk about what do you think about women and their portrayal in sports movies?
One I actually have seen, not one that you listed, but Love and Basketball. That's the only one I can really think of, like off the top of my head.
I'm so sorry. I forgot about Love and Basketball.
Yeah, that one
Continue.
is the only one I could really think of off the top of my head. I think they did a pretty like good job making her a well-rounded character. Like she wasn't put in a box as a female athlete. She had her moments when she was dressed up, but then she had her moments when she was off the court and she was in her chill clothes and then on the court. So I feel like that movie did have a pretty much of a well-rounded picture of what a woman athlete can be. And it wasn't just in a box. Like she wasn't over sexualized or and I found when we had that I don't know if y'all watched that documentary, but a lot of women are either like overly sexualized, or they're like put in a box into being like gay or lesbian. So it was I feel like that was the perfect balance for the basketball one.
Yeah.
I just want to.
I'm sorry.
I just want to include this fact about Love. Yo, I'm sorry. I'm excited. I just want to include this one fact about Love and Basketball. It was written and directed by a woman.
Oh wow.
So it was written by. I got to give her props because she's an amazing director and writer. Gina Prince Blythewood. She directed and wrote Love and Basketball. But continue.
Um, no, I was just going to say, the thing about female sports movies is they're inspiring, especially the ones that are based on true stories, like The Long Shot. You know, just like you said, how your sister started playing tennis because of Serena Williams. There's so many little girls, especially little black girls, who may see these movies and see these people and you know have confidence that they can be that person too. And I think that's something that we need, especially in our community, because we need to let the women in our lives know, especially the little black girls know that they can grow up and they can be special, not just the men, they can grow up and, follow their dreams and achieve everything they want to do.
I definitely agree with what he said. It was definitely when I was younger and I seen the Long Shot movie with Keke Palmer and Ice Cube. It was very inspiring and it made me like want to play football and wondering like, well, why can't I play football with them? Like, why does football only have to be just a male sport? Why can't girls play too? And things like that. With the Joanna Man movie, watching it like when it first came out when I was younger, whatever, it was like okay, interesting movie and liked it. But like as I got older and started to think about it, I feel like it was a little weird that like, this is a man portraying to be a woman to play in the women's basketball, but he looked like a man. So I feel like it was kind of a little bit of like stereotypical of what they think about women. Like they think that some women do look like men and everything. Like, I just thought that was a little weird.
Lastly, or maybe not lastly, I don't know how much time we have left. But do you think we need more sports movies with women in them?
Absolutely.
And what sports would you want to see in women play in movies?
Uh, every movie that men play in movies, every movie that sports that men play, uh, that a lot of people will say women can't do, because I feel like a lot of people feel For example, a lot of people feel women shouldn't play football, but if you have these movies coming out with women playing football, and then in real life, just like the girl in the long shot, girls actually doing it, then it becomes more realistic. And people start believing in it more. Little girls start believing in it more, and it becomes more of a real thing. It's not much of like people wouldn't take it so much as like just a joke. Not really a joke, but they would take it serious.
I have noticed some, if you consider like dance and cheerleading, like competition cheerleading, women's sports, there are many shows about that type of stuff. But the thing about those shows is like they're catty. So I would like to see stuff where it's like one is not like the typical women's sports, like gymnastics, cheerleading and dance, and it's more things like, I know at my school we had field hockey, and that was like a very popular women's sports that a lot of people went to the games. Lacrosse, soccer, like you don't really see a lot of movies about women's sports that aren't cheerleading, gymnastics, or shows that aren't like cheerleading, gymnastics, or dance. So I would like to see stuff where women are in like unisex sports where both men and women can do it. Not saying they can't, men and women can't do gymnastics or cheerleading, but they mostly don't. Like it's dominated by women.
Yeah, like piggybacking off of that, seeing like women in other sports that isn't like cheerleading and stuff like that. I feel like it's important to point out that like when it comes to these female athletes, their gender like affects their performance evaluation, if that makes sense. Like when people are looking at women and they're trying to play football and there's certain stuff that, like if they're having an off day or, whatever, it's based off of like emotional and physical demands that people feel like women can't meet. But like if a guy was to have like an off day, it'll just be like a bad day for them. So I just feel like women have to like constantly prove themselves when it comes to certain sports, and them being in different sports would, like you guys said, like make it more normal, if that makes sense.
Well, if everybody has said their piece, I'll wrap it up. Okay, great. This has been another episode of the Intellectual Soul Food Lunch Buffet Podcast. Thank you so much for our special guest today, Kristen Bauman, Christian Stargill, Tamira, Chad N, and Shayna Hayes. You guys have done a wonderful job today. I've learned so much about the world of women in sports journalism and women in sports. This has been a great episode. And with that, please follow us on Instagram, other social medias. Listen to our podcast for more episodes on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever else you can find your podcasts. I have been Stuart Scott, and this has been the Intellectual Soul Food Lunch Buffet Podcast.